This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there and welcome to Global Business Africa. We'll be giving you insight into Africa's business and financial markets. I'm Uche Okoronkwo, coming to you from Kenya's capital, Nairobi. Let's start with a look at the markets. Our markets were trading pretty nervously today. Globally, stocks were headed for their biggest monthly drop since the pandemic hit markets in March 2020. Now, emerging market shares fell sharply for a third straight session. And traders say fears over tensions between Russia and the West, and of course the prospect of monetary policy tightening, is now weighing on sentiment. The broader MSCI index of emerging shares fell 1.1% on the day. Of course, the prospect of a tightening monetary policy will continue to shake risky assets such as equities. Now, also coming up on today's show. Trade between Africa and China tops $254 billion in 2021, the highest so far. Malawi's president dissolves the entire cabinet over corruption allegations. And the South Sudanese journalist who doubles up as a taxi tout to encourage young people to take pride in their work. Well, the IMF has now announced that the global growth is expected to moderate from 5.9% in 2021 to 4.4% in 2022, half a percentage point lower for 2022 than previously forecast. The World Economic Outlook revealed many advanced economies and emerging and developing economies. We are upgrading our inflation forecasts for this year. Now, the continuing global recovery faces multiple challenges as the pandemic enters its third year. The rapid spread of the Omicron variant has led to renewed travel restrictions in many countries and also increased labor shortages. Now, supply disruptions still weigh on activity and are contributing to higher inflation.
So we are downgrading growth for this year to 4.4%. Mainly driven by downgrades for the US and China. Growth for 2023 is projected to be 3.8%. For many advanced economies and emerging and developing economies, we are upgrading our inflation forecasts for this year.
Well, on that note, let's shift our focus to other data coming out today. Trade between China and Africa reached an all-time high in 2021 at an estimated $254 billion. Now, this marks a 35% year-on-year increase that surpasses pre-COVID levels. China exported goods worth $148 billion, up 29.9%. That's compared to 2020. It also received imports from Africa worth $106 billion, marking a rise of 43.7%. Now, in 2020, trade dropped 11% year-on-year to $187 billion due to the coronavirus pandemic control measures imposed across the world. South Africa took the lion's share of China's trade with about $54 billion last year. That's followed by Nigeria at $26 billion, Angola with $23 billion, and Egypt with $19 billion. Well, let's now take this apart further with Zainab Usman. She's director of the Africa program at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace in Washington, D.C. Great to have you with us, as always, on the show, Zainab. Now, of course, as I just mentioned, in 2020, we saw trade between China and Africa surpassing even pre-COVID-19 numbers. Some, of course, point to Beijing's recent push to boost African imports as a key reason for these numbers, and also rising commodity prices. What are your thoughts on what's fueling this record highs, and certainly what they reveal about China-Africa relations so far?
Yes, indeed. Good to be here. So, as you rightly mentioned, we have seen a surge in trade between Africa and China, which is even more than the pre-pandemic level. And this has cemented China's position as Africa's top trade partner, followed by the US, whose trade with Africa stood at around $58 billion in 2021. Now, then the question is, what is driving this increase in the trade volume between African countries and China? It seems that when you look at the figures, it is largely driven by exports from China to the African continent. So you also mentioned that in 2021, China shipped around $448 billion worth of goods to Africa and imported $106 billion in return. So there's some kind of deficit there in the relationship. And when you really drill deeper down, you find that, even though the pandemic has disrupted trade and economic activity globally, but it did not really dampen demand for essential goods such as pharmaceuticals, personal protective equipment, PPEs, masks, hazmat suits, medication, chemicals, but also very importantly, digital hardware like mobile phones, computer, and accessories. All of these things are things that were very essential and are still essential as different individuals, household, communities, countries navigate the pandemic. And in fact, these are sectors that, according to, I think, a report by UNCTAD, had sustained demand throughout 2020 and 2021. And very importantly, these are sectors in which China is a major producer. So you have to look at the sectors. I think another thing I would mention is that even though there's a kind of trade imbalance there between exports from China and imports from Africa into China, we have also seen that exports from some African countries have actually increased within this period in 2021. So countries like Libya and Benin, their exports to China actually quadrupled. And there were increases also from Togo, Sao Tome and Principe, Sierra Leone, Burkina Faso, and a couple of other countries. Now, the other part of your question is, what does this tell us about the relations between African countries and China? I would say maybe two things very quickly. The first is that trade and more broadly economic engagement between China and Africa, this is really not declining, right? In the past couple of weeks, especially after the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation concluded, there was a lot of talk in some quarters that China is disengaging from Africa for a variety of reasons, including due to challenges in its domestic economy or the changing geopolitical environment or even increased risk in some African countries. But the numbers we're seeing around trade volumes clearly do not support this argument. Then I think another broader implication for China-Africa relations here is that we're seeing, despite the rising trade volume, that there are some familiar patterns that persist in this economic and trade relationship. So the trade imbalance, which is very clear, weighs heavily in favor of China because it exports more to Africa, and those exports are mostly finished goods and manufactures, whereas it imports primary commodities from China, from Africa. Right. And then the top trade partners in Africa are mostly commodity producers: Nigeria, Angola, DRC, etc. So we're seeing some familiar patterns there persist.
Quite right. And which leads me to my next question. Africa accounts for just 4.2% of China's $6 trillion international commerce portfolio, and that was in 2021. Now, coupled with what you just mentioned, which is the reality that most African exports to China are dominated by raw materials and unprocessed products, and that, of course, results in a trade surplus in China's favor. Are we likely to see any substantial change in this anytime soon? What is your outlook?
So the first part of your question around, that Africa constitutes just, around 4% of China's global trade. I think that is true, but then you have to see things maybe from the perspective of African countries. That 4% or the $250+ billion is a lot, for African countries. So globally, yes, it sounds like a very small fraction, but for African countries, that is actually quite significant. And they would even want more trade, not just with China, but with the US, with the EU, with other parts of the world. And then are things going to change? Is there likely to be change? Change could happen, yes, in this trade relationship, in trying to rebalance that deficit that we have spoken about, but it will not happen on its own. It has to be driven by policies, by concerted efforts. So policies and efforts on behalf of, on the part of African policymakers, they need to implement productivity enhancing policies, increase connectivity infrastructure, focus on e-commerce in particular, because what we've seen during this pandemic is that a lot of African traders, business people who would typically travel physically to China, Guangzhou, and other parts of China could not travel. So they had to rely on e-commerce, right? So African countries need to enhance and support e-commerce. That would be one example. And just basically policies that support small businesses and remove non-tariff trade barriers. Then Chinese policymakers also need to relax trade barriers. And I know this is a topic that has come up frequently in engagement with African policymakers. There are some stringent requirements for non-commodity exports to Africa. So one example that is often given is in East Africa, Kenya in particular, a lot of Kenyan farmers want to export avocados, some processed avocados to China, but the regulations, the requirements around that to flash freeze those avocados before exports is quite onerous, and they've only just begun to meet those regulations. And then Chinese policymakers have to make good on their promises to increase market access to to processed goods to manufacturers from African countries to China.
Well, we do have to leave it there, Zainab, but many thanks for that great discussion. That, of course, was Zainab Usman. She's the Africa Program Director at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace in Washington, D.C. Well, let's stay with China. The country has become the world's second largest consumer market, the largest merchandise trader for 5 years in a row, and of course the second largest destination for foreign direct investment in 2021. This was all announced by China's Ministry of Commerce at a press conference on Tuesday while unveiling the country's business and trade performance for 2021. Here's Yang Shanshan with more.
Despite COVID-19, China's foreign trade reached new heights in 2021, with total imports and exports growing by 21.4% to 39.1 trillion RMB, about $6 trillion. However, Chinese Ministry of Commerce warns the global economy still faces uncertainties in 2022.
The pandemic still continues and there is still risk of supply chain cuts, which might slow down global economic recovery. We will provide support to trade companies, diversify trade routes, make use of the international e-commerce platform to promote trade, improve trade digitalization, and develop green trade development.
In 2021, China's domestic consumption gradually recovered, and total retail of consumer goods increasing by 12.5%. As the world's second-largest consumer market, consumption resumed as the top driving force for Chinese economy. China also became the second-largest destination of foreign direct investment in 2021, as well as a major global investor.
We will continue to reform and open up to the rest of the world. We will relax the automobile industry and would provide land and tax policy to attract more foreign investors to invest in high-tech industries, advanced manufacturing industry, digital and green economy, as well as low-carbon technology. We will also help foreign companies to solve their difficulties in China.
To help support China's economic growth, China promises to improve business environment for investors and promote global trade in bilateral and multilateral cooperation. Yang Shanshan, CGTN, Beijing.
Well, let's shift focus to Malawi now. President Lazarus Chakwera has dissolved the country's entire cabinet amid charges of corruption against 3 ministers. Now, speaking during an address to the nation late on Monday, he said that he had taken all the functions of cabinet until he announces a reconfigured cabinet in 2 days. The 3 cabinet ministers include the lands minister, Kezi Msukwa, who is accused of benefiting from land deals involving a UK-based Malawian businessman. Labour Minister Ken Kandodo is accused of diverting COVID-19 funds, and Energy Minister Newton Kambala is accused of meddling in the awarding of fuel import deals. Well, let's now take a look at our corporate headlines today. Shell has made a significant oil and gas discovery at a closely watched watched offshore well in Namibia. This could spark a wave of investment in the southern African nation. The Namibian government is planning to make an announcement next week on the details of the discovery at the Graph 1 well, which Shell started drilling last month. It is unclear if the discoveries are big enough for Shell to go ahead with the development of the country's first deep water field. And South African President Cyril Ramaphosa has ordered the Special Investigating Unit in his country to examine Telkom's sale of 3 businesses for possible malfeasance. The president wants Telkom's sale of iWay Africa, Africa Online Mauritius, and Multilinks Telecoms investigated. Charges include improper or unlawful conduct by employees, officials, or agents of Telkom, and unlawful appropriation of expenditure of public money or property. And Credit Suisse has warned that it will post a fourth-quarter loss as the scandal-hit lender flagged fresh legal costs. It said that business in its trading and wealth management divisions had slowed. Switzerland's second-largest lender announced plans in November to rein in its investment bankers and plow money into looking after the fortunes of the world's rich as it tries to curb a freewheeling culture that has cost it billions. And that's a look at our corporate headlines. Well, let's head into a short break now, still to come on the show. Algeria's president visits Egypt for the first time in 14 years. And traders in Uganda protest a tax increase on imported rice.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global business, only on CGTN.
So this is it, I'm just about to be shot.
The little tents here, bottles are being thrown as they do so.
There are about 3 critical bridges here in Malawi. That's one of them, we're going to cross that bridge.
As you can see behind me, police forces
who are replying with gas. Gas just came in.
Tear gas, so it's all begun now.
Divisions leading the charge into West Mosul have brought us here.
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots.
This is where most of the fighting has been concentrated.
This is the front line now after 9 days of fighting.
We're about 2 to 3 kilometers from the front
clear
line.
View of this front line position.
Welcome back. Now, Algerian President Abdelmadjid Tebboune is in Cairo for a 2-day state visit. He has discussed boosting bilateral ties with Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi. Now, the visit is the first by an Algerian head of state in some 14 years. Here's CGTN's Adel El Maroui reporting.
Algerian President Abdelmadjid Tebboune began his international trips this year with his first official stop in the Egyptian capital, Cairo. Keen to highlight the importance of this visit to his nation, Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi welcomed Tebboune at the airport upon his arrival on Monday. The two leaders held expanded talks which covered all issues of concern to both North African nations.
Consultation between us over bilateral ties is continuous and over the role that both Egypt and Algeria lead to contribute through Arab and Africa cooperation to what leads to the security and stability of the region. We stressed on the necessity to work on preserving our position in Africa and in the South Mediterranean region. Egypt has a geostrategic role that can extend bridges of connectivity from Africa to Asia. Sisi and Tebboune agreed to boost investment, trade, and work on resolving all obstacles that hinder their comprehensive economic ties from growing. They renewed their stance of a two-state solution to the Palestinian crisis based on the 1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital. Instability in their neighboring Libya was thoroughly explored.
We discussed the developments in the Libyan crisis. We have agreement in our views to hold the presidential and parliamentary elections simultaneously. We call for the evacuation of all foreign fighters and mercenaries without exception and in a timely manner. That is to apply UN Security Council resolutions and the outcomes of the Berlin and Paris conference so that Libya would be under Libyan control.
Cairo and Algiers will reactivate their suspended joint economic and political cooperation platforms as they seek stronger ties. They vowed to heighten their security cooperation to face regional terrorism. Tebboune has also consulted Sisi on the means to make the Arab Summit, which Algeria will host this year, succeed. Relations between Egypt and Algeria used to be tense during Presidents Mubarak and Bouteflika's tenure. President Sisi took the initiative to mend these ties by making Algeria his first international visit after he took office in 2014. Now the two biggest economies in North Africa say they will cooperate in all fields to make the Middle East and Africa prosper. Adil Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
Well, let's go to Tanzania now. The country says it has earned over $6 million from the sale of tourist hunting blocks. Now, the government says it made about $3.8 million more than what it collected in the last auction in 2019. Here's CGTN's Daniel Kijo with more.
Tanzania is looking to grow its hunting safari sector. The government says the recent electronic auction of 45 tourist hunting blocks has earned the country more than $6 million. The blocks are graded in categories of 1 to 3, and bidders pay different fees depending on the category of the block.
For this auction, we had put up 75 hunting blocks for sale. About 49 hunting blocks will see their ownership end on the 31st of December 2022. And 26 hunting blocks had been opened. A total of 39 companies participated in the auction. 26 companies were able to lock down the hunting block, which is 54% of the companies that participated.
When starting its tourist hunting industry in the 1960s, Tanzania implemented the first block and quota system in Africa. It is famed for having the wildest range of game in all of Africa. The recent auction comes 2 years after the process was put on halt following the complaints of unfairness in allocating the hunting blocks. The government says the aim of the auction is to increase transparency and allow the market to compete to bring out the true value of the country's resources. The head of the Hunting Operators Association says the reserve fee for the hunting blocks this time was more than 4 times in some blocks. He says the unfair pricing threatens to eliminate local hunting operators from the sector.
Any increase on the price of the blocks will be reflected on the increase of the price on the safaris that are sold to the clients. Now, we used to get over 2,000 clients per year, Tanzania. Now we are only getting 400 and something. They say 500, okay, 500. What is that? It means we have fallen behind by 75%. Because this is only 25% of what we used to get. Now, if we have fallen that far behind and you are increasing the fees, it means you are increasing the cost. It means even this number will go down. You will never make the money.
The auction was initially scheduled for March last year, but the Ministry of Natural Resources and Tourism partly blames the delays on market instability caused by the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic. Daniel Kijo, CGTN, Dar es Salaam, Tanzania.
And in Angola, Finance Minister Vera Davis de Souza says the nation will return to international capital markets this year to sell Eurobonds. Now, Angola last issued dollar bonds in late 2019 to fund its ambitious reforms, but it saw yields spiking to around 30% in March 2020. The South African nation suffered a series of downgrades that drove its sovereign rating into the substantial risk category. With borrowing costs having come down, the government is looking to cover part of its $4 billion external funding needs through bond sales. However, the partial privatization of state oil firm Sonangol could take another 2 years.
Sonangol has a lot of assets, have a lot of process going through law process to make sure that they can recover assets that are under the process of recovering assets. So a lot of judicial challenges, and also well registering the operation that they did in the last year. So the balance sheet of Sonangol should reflect in a very transparent way the assets that they have. And today, it doesn't. We will decide this. We are talking that on our GDP, we have gross domestic financing needs of 13% of GDP. We expect that from that 7% of GDP, we will raise internally on our domestic market, and 5.6% of GDP we will raise on the external market, but in a mixture of credit lines and Eurobond markets.
Well, let's turn our attention to Ethiopia now. The World Bank projects that the country's economy will grow by 4.3% in 2022 and 6.5% by 2023. Its forecast is based on the assumption that the soaring prices of commodities in the global market will help boost export opportunities for countries such as Ethiopia. Still, its projection is lower than the government's growth projection of 8.7% and 8% by the Africa Development Bank, respectively. Here's Coletta Wanjoy reporting from Addis Ababa.
The World Bank says high prices for food commodities like coffee and cotton will benefit agricultural exporters in countries like Ethiopia and Kenya. A decline in supply from major exporters like Brazil is offering Ethiopia an opportunity to improve its volume and income of the Arabica beans. It made a record sale worth over $900 million last year. The opening up of the telecom sector is also spurring some growth. Safaricom Ethiopia, a consortium of 4 major global companies, paid $850 million in license fees and is planning to inject even more as it sets up operations in the country. But like other countries, Ethiopia has been affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, which has suffocated businesses, and people have been forced to suspend some investment opportunities, while others have been forced to lose their jobs. The World Bank, however, says that Ethiopia is one of the countries whose growth is being slowed by insecurity. A conflict in the country's north continues to cost the government, and it has been forced to divert resources to the security apparatus nationally. The prolonged conflict has forced new investors to shy away and some existing ones to limit production. It has attracted sanctions from the United States, which has now cut Ethiopia off from a duty-free trade program, AGOA, over alleged human rights violations. Ethiopian government says it will need resources to rehabilitate areas affected by the conflict. The conflict has ruined harvest and production in rich agricultural regions. The Food and Agriculture Organization is flagging Ethiopia as one of the countries in the Horn of Africa that is adversely impacted by droughts and floods. The government says it is committed to restoring security and implementing economic reforms that would transform the agrarian low-income country to an industrialized low-middle-income country by the year 2030. If these and other obstacles are eliminated, World Bank says Ethiopia might regain its 9% rate that it hit in the year 2019. Coletta Njohi, CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Change is on the horizon. Through the shifting of time, Africa's emerging tech landscape is creating new channels.
There's a hunger for local African content globally.
Shaped by innovation, carved out by a new generation of digital entrepreneurs, sculpted by a mobile revolution, trickling down to the most remote corners of the continent. TechSpot is seeking out the new concepts in technology, disrupting Africa's traditional sectors.
You're watching breaking news on CGTN.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. You're watching Global Business Africa, and let's head to Uganda now, where traders are protesting against a tax increase on imported rice. The new levies require traders to pay more than double the original tax on a 100 kg bag of rice. Now, most importers in Uganda had turned to Tanzania rice because of its quality and lower prices. Here's CGTN's Leon Sinyange reporting.
Bukenya Bunya checks the last of his rice stock for sale this month. It has been more than 3 weeks since his latest order of rice came through.
The situation has not been good since the end of December. Even up to now, rice cannot come across because of the levies. I worry for the people that buy from us.
For every 100 kilogram bag of rice that he does manage to import from Tanzania, he now has to pay $5 in tax compared to $2 previously. It's a dire situation for almost all rice traders.
The income is so slow. We are not gaining anything because apparently you can get like 10 customers a day, but then most customers are just coming in to ask questions about the rice. Others are being frustrated just because they think we are having they think we're having prices that are going down soon.
The demand for rice in Uganda stands at around 380,000 metric tons per month. Local production caters for close to 60%. The traders have raised their concerns with the government, and they are optimistic there will be a change in direction on the new taxes. However, that could take a while to achieve. In the meantime, experts believe there could be serious disruption to the supply chain.
If this tax is mandatory, they will have to pay it. It will have an implication on their costs of marketing, which they would have wanted to pass on to the consumer. But they have to watch at the competing products, the substitutes, the real substitutes, which are out there.
Currently, Uganda is a net importer of rice, with large amounts coming from Tanzania and Pakistan. Supporting the country's smallholder growers, experts say will boost Uganda's rice production and make the country less reliant on foreign imports. Leon Sanyange, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
And shifting focus to Nigeria now, new fathers are spending time with their newborn children, and that's thanks to the country's first civil service reform in 13 years. After much debate, the country passed a law allowing men who work for the federal government to take 14 days paid paternity leave. Here's CGTN's Tessim Akende reporting.
Godwin Ibrahim and his wife Faith have come to the clinic together to take their baby boy for a postnatal examination. Matthew is their first child, and Godwin, a civil servant, is taking paid paternity leave to be with his family.
We really appreciate the federal government for this paternity leave that he gave to us, because we have a time to go close to our wife and our child.
In September, the government approved 14 days of paternity leave for fathers. Mothers already were entitled to 4 months of maternity leave. It's one of the major reforms introduced by the government after many years of debate around the issue.
Children are, like we said, a blank canvas, and they get to bond better with those who are in their immediate environment. And I believe fathers being part of their of the child care at birth, beyond just, the few hours they may spend in the morning or in the evening with their families, is going to be of much importance, not just to the child's well-being, but to the mothers as well.
Abigail Ikenum explains there was significant resistance to the legislation, which now makes it compulsory for civil servants to take the leave.
I also believe it's taking us a while to get here because of our culture and belief system, in the men being the macho or the ones who are not very involved in the family system. Men always go out to look for food or any living to support the mother and kids.
The new paternity leave law is mandatory for civil servants. Private companies in Nigeria are free to grant the leave, but they are not required to do so.
The Nigeria Labour Congress is calling on the government to extend the new directive on paternity leave to private companies too.
Public health experts say if fathers like Godwin Ibrahim use their paternity leave to bond with their children and to help take care of them, it will help new families like his get off to a good start. Hassan Akende, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
Meanwhile, Egypt marked the 11th anniversary of the January 25th revolution on Tuesday. This is, of course, the revolution that led to the overthrow of then Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak after 30 years in office. Yasser Kim takes a look at what has been achieved since then.
On January 25, 2011, millions of Egyptians from all socio-economic and political backgrounds began continuous protests countrywide to overthrow former President Hosni Mubarak. It lasted until February 11th, when Vice President Omar Suleiman announced that Mubarak has resigned after 30 years in power. It was an event that opened a new chapter for the people of the most populous Middle East and North African nation. Those in the streets at the time had four main demands: better living conditions, freedom, social justice, and human dignity. Tariq al-Kholi, a known activist during the revolution, says the aim was to make these demands a reality.
Each one of these demands represents the visions, the hopes and dreams for protesters back then. If we analyze what has been achieved, on the political front, the most evident is that there is more empowerment for youth and more political representation in parliament. Deputy ministers and deputy governors are young people, and the state is launching regular programs to create youth leaders in various sectors. Socially, there's been a social revolution with multiple legislations for social development, social justice, as well as projects and initiatives such as the Dignified Life Initiative. Then there was the tough period of aggressive economic reforms, a battle that we all went through and had to sacrifice to rebuild the damaged economy.
In his speech in this year's anniversary, Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi acknowledged that some of the revolution goals are yet to be fulfilled.
The 25th of January revolution has expressed the Egyptian people's ambition to build a new future where they would enjoy a dignified living. The road is still long. What has been achieved with the economy and security is just a step in building the future that we seek, to place the foundations for a new republic that maintains the dignity of the Egyptian citizen and guarantees the best living conditions.
And al-Kholi, who is now a parliament member, agrees there are still challenges ahead.
We're still halfway. Not everything we dreamed of has been realized. Our main challenge now is the economic development for higher living standards and improved social justice. We have done very well in national security and fighting terrorism. The state was very successful and restored stability and peace, political representation for youth, women and people with disabilities. What remains as the biggest challenge is the economy.
Egyptians are still divided on the effects of the revolution. Some believe it has brought welcomed political change to the North African nation by replacing corrupt leaders. Others say it has pushed the development process back 20 years, with the instability that followed, including having a second uprising, 3 presidents and a war on terrorism. But there's an agreement on what should come.
We cannot deny there are a lot of advantages. There are big improvements in security, infrastructure, in transport, railway, and in rebuilding the country. But there are negatives. The value of the Egyptian pound has dropped significantly. The cost of living has increased. Yes, there are salary increases, but still prices are high.
The dignified living and the 100 million health initiatives for the poor are a good response to the demand we wanted and go a long way to improve people's lives. What the government should work on going forward is building the people, the new generation, start growing from down up, give more attention to health and education services, and tackle the challenges. President Sisi and the government are working on it, but we want more effort to stop price hikes and to improve living conditions.
In spite of the mixed reactions towards the impact of the January 25th revolution on Egypt 11 years on, it will always remain a pivotal point in Egypt's modern history. Yasser Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
Now, South Africa's governing party leader, Cyril Ramaphosa, has undertaken to urgently address matters of immigration in order to ensure that anti-immigrant sentiments that have been rising in the country don't worsen going forward. Now, Ramaphosa was speaking after a two-day meeting of the ANC's National Executive Committee. Here's CGTN's Yolisa Njamela with an update.
Since the South African government announced late last year that it will not be renewing temporary permits of around 250,000 Zimbabweans working in the country when their visas expire, there's been growing anger directed at foreign nationals living here. Movements such as the one called Put South Africans First are fast gaining traction. The movement has become the first organized group to openly call for the immediate deportation of foreign nationals, especially those who are in the country without legal papers. Some opposition political parties have even gone to the extent of visiting restaurants, demanding to see how many foreign nationals they have in their employ versus locals. There are now growing concerns about a possible outbreak of xenophobic violence. As a result, the governing ANC's highest decision-making body, the National Executive Committee, has called for this to be arrested.
The ANC will need to lead the debate on immigration in order to ensure that it remains infused with principles of Pan-Africanism and is not overtaken by right-wing sentiments. Promoting legal migration is a central aspect of securing the peace and security of South Africa and the sub-region, and the ANC must act against the stoking of anti-African sentiment.
South Africa has a history of violence against foreign nationals, particularly those from the rest of the continent. In a wide-ranging speech after a two-day meeting of the ANC's National Executive Committee, the ANC president also made a frank admission that the governing party is deeply divided, and those divisions are a threat to the country's democratic gains.
Our movement is going through a period of decay and degeneration. The ANC has been able to extricate itself from similar situations in the past. It is important not to lower our guard against counter-revolution. The threat to our democratic gains is also a result of an era of loss of moral and ethical principles within the Congress movement. We need to show determination in addressing the toxic legacy of state capture that resulted in security institutions being weakened, misdirected, and hollowed out. Divisions and factions in the ANC are themselves becoming a threat to our democracy.
The ANC is due to hold its elective Congress in December, and divisions are expected to intensify as contestation for positions in the party gain momentum. Yolisa Njamela for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Well, let's now turn our attention to Uganda's real estate sector. It is picking up after a two-year COVID-19 pandemic fallout. Real estate developers say there is a growing demand for commercial showroom space and also residential apartments. Here's CGTN's Hilary Ayesiga reporting.
Wilberforce Nsamba is a property developer. He's putting up this new residential estate outside the capital, Kampala.
The demand has come up, but also signing of the ECOP
treaty of the oil pipeline, we are seeing more international companies and expatriates coming on and looking for their office and residential spaces.
But despite the COVID-19 pandemic restrictions, this neighborhood is fast transforming into a high-end residential area. Developers here say to keep in business, they are handing out concessions to tenants.
We've given them rent-free periods. We've come up with adjustable and flexible payment plans to make sure that they're able to stay with us longer, but also we've reduced the prices of rent and the prices of office spaces per square meter to make sure that at least more people can take up the vacant spaces as we recover.
A one-bedroom rental apartment here costs about $250 US. Uganda has fully reopened its economy after nearly 2 years of pandemic-related restrictions, and developers here are pushing to have these apartments completed so that they can attract new tenants. Real estate developers are hoping for a quick rebound with the growing population that is in need of housing.
In Uganda, of course, the population, we have the advantage of the population. The demand for residential housing is always there. Maybe the discrepancy would be which type of housing, upscale or low scale or affordable. But the demand is always there because the population keeps growing.
According to Uganda Bureau of Statistics, the country has a deficit of 1.2 million residential units per annum. But as the demand for housing units continues to rise, real estate developers like in Samba are striving to fill the gap. Hilara Yesiga, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
Now, in Nigeria, the film industry is picking up after a rather difficult period. Nollywood, as the film industry is called, was badly hit by pandemic-related restrictions, but it is now on track to hit its targets. Here's CGTN's Deji Badamosi with the latest.
On the set of a film in the streets of Lagos. It's the making of a new film following the resumption of activities in Nollywood after a long break due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Nigeria's film industry almost grounded to a halt following the outbreak of COVID-19 in the country in February 2020. That threw hundreds of thousands who make a living from the industry out of work. But with the lifting of the restrictions, life is fast returning to Nollywood, which is estimated to rake in $10 billion annually. Recent figures from the Nigeria Bureau of Statistics put the number of films produced in the second quarter of 2021 at 634. That's a jump from the 416 produced in the first quarter of the same year.
We are boosting Nigeria's economy because we're the highest content makers on the continent, and whether you like it or not, our population helps.
Nollywood accounts for about 2% of Nigeria's GDP, employing more than 1 million persons. Before the pandemic, the industry churned out about 2,500 films annually.
Nollywood is actually like a production line in a factory. Within the film space, there are creative designers, so you do fashion, you have props, so you have interiors, you have cinematographers. So it just shows the amount of jobs that can be created. Technicians, the runners, the gaffers, everybody that works. So you have electricians, you have welders. Everybody is in the film ecospace.
The quality of films now coming out of Nollywood has improved tremendously, but investment in the industry is still low. The number of big budget films are few.
My biggest challenge as a filmmaker is finance. It's difficult to go the orthodox route to find money, the conventional, go to the bank, give them a business proposition and get money. It's virtually impossible with the Nollywood template. So you have to raise money through alternative means.
I think the investors are excited by the show of the business rather than the business of the show. So it's two different things. There's still a lot of vacuum in totally understanding the value chain of what the film industry needs. Nobody has actually understood that the biggest area hasn't been captured. We don't have enough cinema screens in the country yet. Community cinemas have to come on board, as well as the fact that people haven't really started harnessing television.
Despite its challenges, Nollywood is still defying the odds and telling compelling African stories, while at the same time improving the quality of its productions. Deji Bademasi, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
And a little-known crop in Ethiopia could be the answer to food scarcity as climate change disrupts farming practices. Now, scientists say that Enset, otherwise known as the false banana plant, has the potential to feed more than 100 million people if it is cultivated across other countries in Africa. Here's CGTN's Beryl Oro with more on that report.
This is Enset, also known as the false banana plant. Virtually unknown outside of Ethiopia, but here it's a staple food for around 20 million people. And new research suggests it could be a solution to food shortages and famine caused by climate change.
So Enset is a really unusual crop in that you can plant it any time of year, you can harvest it any time of year. It's perennial, so it gets larger and larger each year. And what this combination of traits means is that farmers can use it when they need it. It allows them to buffer seasonal food insecurity. And that gives farmers real flexibility to try and tackle problems like acute food insecurity.
The false banana tree doesn't produce any edible fruit, unlike its wild relative, the banana tree. But every part of the tree is used either for cattle fodder or cooking. The root and the base are mashed to a pulp and fermented to make bread.
So as a species, most of what we use is a very small handful of the diversity of plants on Earth. So we get more than half our calories from just 3 species, rice, wheat, maize. What we're showing here is that Enset is one example of an amazing underutilized crops from Ethiopia that could have much wider potential to help us meet global challenges like food security.
Enset is believed to have first been identified in Ethiopia around 7,000 years ago. Although Enset grows wildly in other East African countries, nowhere else in the world is this a food source. It's mainly grown by communities in the south and southwest highlands of Ethiopia, and as a result, these people rarely experience famine. But scientists have discovered that it grows in the wild across a far wider area, so there is every chance it could become an agricultural crop in more countries.
Enset's really restricted distribution is something of a kind of mystery, right? So as a species, when crops are really useful and successful, they tend to spread around the world. So if you think of bananas, they started in Southeast Asia thousands of years ago, and now we find them, in almost every tropical country on Earth. So why hasn't Enset done the same thing? That's one of the mysteries we're trying to understand.
Many crops are threatened by climate change, hotter temperatures and less rainfall. Scientists say the predictability of weather patterns has changed, meaning some farmers are now looking at diversity. And Enset could be a solution. Beryl Oro, CGTN.
On that note, let's take a look at commodity markets today. Oil prices bouncing back, recovering some of the previous day's losses as growing tension in Eastern Europe and the Middle East fueled those concerns over possible supply disruptions in an already tight market. Meanwhile, coffee prices continue to rise for the first time in 4 sessions as the commodity began to recover from a broader sell-off in financial markets. March Arabica futures climbed as high as 2.3%. Meanwhile, Robusta prices also rebounded on the day. On that note, let's take a short break. Still to come on the show. We look at the young South Sudanese journalist who doubles up as a taxi tout.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. And no one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
And now here's news just coming in. Burkina Faso has reopened its airspace. This follows a coup on Sunday that UN Chief Antonio Guterres has strongly condemned. Now, the African Union and West Africa Regional Bloc ECOWAS have also expressed concerns. These sentiments come as the military announced that they had removed Burkina Faso's President Roch Kabore from office. Now, the military cited Kabore's inability to unite the nation and, of course, fight jihadists. Well, let's move on now. A South Sudanese female journalist is inspiring many young girls with her commitment to work her way out of poverty. Now, the young journalist currently works 2 jobs in the capital, Juba, to try and make ends meet. Here's CGTN's Patrick Oyet with her story.
Radio presentation and taxi touting are 2 hectic jobs, but Winnie Aya has to juggle them both on a daily basis. Aya has embraced her busy schedule as she seeks to make ends meet in a country riddled with political and economic crises. The society around her is conservative when it comes to women. Some jobs like taxi touting are often regarded here as being for men. But the 26-year-old has defied all odds by charting the murky male-dominated waters. Aya joined the world of taxi touting, the first woman in South Sudan to become one, a job many associate with illiterate people.
Men can be bullying you, but you should feel confident enough because it's not good to beg money from people. If you sweat like the way I am sweating right now, I'm sure you'll enjoy the money. Yes.
Born to a poor family, Aya always dreamt of becoming a journalist. Aya braves the traditional sun heat in the capital, Juba, to meet financial obligations, including pursuing her academic dreams. And with the money she makes from the tout work, she has managed to pay her fees at the local university, and she's now a graduate of mass communication.
I personally, I feel also I didn't get enough of it in my life, and I need to go for more. So I encourage girls for them to come up and compete with the boys. It's important to hold your education as your key.
In the evening and on weekends, Aya shifts to radio, working at one of the most popular radio stations in South Sudan, iRadio. Aya says she hopes she can inspire young girls in the country to be hardworking and self-reliant. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
Well, before we leave you today, here's a quick look at Africa's currencies. South Africa's rand weakened on concerns about a potential conflict over Ukraine, and of course ahead of central bank meetings expected this week that could influence the trajectory of domestic and international interest rates. Now, the rand traded at 15.3 against the dollar. That's over 8% weaker. Meanwhile, Nigeria's naira fell slightly against the US dollar at the official market, extending its depreciation at the spot market segment for a second day. At the black market, dealers said the naira exchanged at 565 naira per dollar. Well, that's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. Remember, you can send your feedback to the contacts on your screen. You can also follow us on our various digital media platforms. From me, Uche Okoronkwo, and the rest of the team, thanks for watching.